The first light of morning was spilling over the horizon when I opened my eyes in that isolated cabin by the river. The scent of wood and fresh water hit my nostrils, a daily reminder that I'd finally claimed my little piece of peace after serving 15 years in the Special Forces. My name's Miguel. I'm 42 years old, and after 3 tours in the Middle East, all I ever wanted was this refuge away from the urban chaos. I bought this property with my military savings. It's not fancy, but it's mine by right, with perfect documentation and clear boundaries. Every morning I stick to the same routine. I wake up at dawn, make coffee on the wood stove, stroll out to the deck I built with my own hands, and cast my fishing line while watching the mist clear from the river. I never minded the solitude. In fact, after years surrounded by explosions and orders, the silence became my best companion. If you like stories about property rights and unfairness, leave a like. Your support strengthens our community of independent property owners. The residents of Riverside Hills condominium, with their shiny mansions on the far side, always seemed like they belonged to another world. I never bothered with their occasional parties or their fancy boats. My simple cabin, painted in earthy tones to blend in with nature, represented exactly what I needed. That Tuesday, while I was smoking my freshly caught fish, I noticed a man in a suit stepping onto my property. He was carrying a clipboard and taking photos of my deck as if he were at a crime scene. "Excuse me, sir. This is private property," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. The middle-aged man adjusted his thin-rimmed glasses and handed me a business card. "Thomas Harrison, Compliance Committee of the Riverside Hills Homeowners Association. We've received complaints about the aesthetic conditions of your residence. It doesn't meet the set standards." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Mr. Harrison, I'm not part of your association. This property is outside the condo." Harrison glanced at his papers disdainfully. "Your property affects the real estate values of the neighboring homes. The new president of the association, Mrs. Wilson, is determined to raise the visual standards of the area." I slipped the card into my pocket. "I appreciate the visit, but as I said, this land is mine. It's not subject to the condo rules." In the following weeks, letters started arriving. First came polite notifications, then warnings about non-existent fines. I ignored them all. I had every right to live in peace, free from interference. On a clear Saturday, while sanding my fishing boat, I heard the roar of a powerful engine. A black SUV pulled up close to my entrance. An elegant woman, about 50 years old, got out followed by 2 bulky security guards. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Rebecca Wilson, president of the association. I see you've been ignoring our communications." I slowly got up, feeling that old military instinct kick into gear. "Like I told Mr. Harrison, I'm not part of your association." Rebecca smiled with fake warmth. "For now, the board has voted to bring the marginal properties under our jurisdiction. It's only a matter of time." "Without my signature, that'll never happen," I replied, crossing my arms. "We'll see," she declared, leaving a folder on my boat. "These are the mandatory changes for compliance. You have 30 days to make them or face legal consequences." After she left, I examined the ridiculous list. Repaint the cabin in approved colors, remove the handmade deck, replace my boat with a more contemporary model, install landscape lighting. Crumpling the paper, I made a firm decision. No one was going to kick me off the land I'd earned with my blood and sweat. The battle for my property was just beginning, and unlike Rebecca Wilson, I knew the true meaning of war. The next morning, I discovered shards of glass scattered near my boat. You didn't have to be a military tactics expert to know it was sabotage. I gathered every fragment methodically, much like I'd pick up bomb shards in the Iraqi desert. While working, I noticed movement among the trees. A man with a professional camera was documenting my violations. When he saw I caught him, he quickly disappeared. 3 days later, after a trip into town for supplies, I came back to find my deck partially destroyed. Planks had been ripped out, the railing was broken, and there were clear signs of a pry bar on the structures. That familiar feeling of looming threat ran down my spine. In battlefields, I learned that intimidation is just a prelude to the main attack. That night, I set up discreet security cameras. Like a sniper, I understood the importance of strategic patience. Rebecca Wilson had no idea who she was dealing with, as she played golf on pristine courses. I crawled through hostile territory, staying invisible for days. The opportunity for a direct confrontation came the following week, when 3 uniformed men invaded my property. I recorded everything as they systematically destroyed my newly planted garden, claiming they were removing unapproved invasive species. The tallest among them, whom the others called Anderson, was wielding a pry bar identical to the one that damaged my deck. "I suggest you leave my property immediately," I announced, silently emerging behind them. The trio jumped. The youngest, identified as Cooper from his badge, recovered first. "We're authorized by the association to remove non-compliant elements." "That's trespassing and criminal vandalism," I replied, showing my phone recording. "I have documentation of the previous damages too. Leave now, or I'll call the authorities." Anderson advanced, pry bar in hand. "The cops already know you're a problem, veteran. Mrs. Wilson has important friends over at the station." I stood my ground. I almost smiled. I'd mistaken intimidation for real threats so many times that I could tell the difference. Last chance. Reluctantly, they backed off, not without delivering one final warning. "This isn't over, Rodriguez." The next day, as expected, 2 police officers showed up at my door with false accusations of threats and erratic behavior. I calmly showed them the recordings of the invasions and the meticulous reports I'd prepared. Realizing the situation, the officer suggested I seek legal representation. "I know someone," the most experienced one said discreetly before leaving. "Christopher Grant, an ex-prosecutor who specializes in property rights. Tell him Officer Martinez sent you." That was Rebecca Wilson's strategy, clear as day. Wear me down, force emotional mistakes, create a pretext for legal intervention. It was like facing insurgents. They didn't need to win, just make you lose control. I hired Christopher Grant that same afternoon. His modest office displayed only 2 things on the walls: his law license and a photo alongside a state Supreme Court judge. "Cases against homeowners associations are my specialty," he explained after reviewing my paperwork. "There's a pattern here. Rebecca Wilson has a history of annexing adjacent properties to boost revenue and real estate values. Several owners simply sold to avoid the harassment." "I'm not selling," I stated firmly. Christopher smiled. "I thought so. Military types rarely abandon their positions." He organized the documents. "First, we'll file a restraining order against everyone involved. Second, we'll sue for damages and harassment. Third, we'll investigate those police buddies she mentioned." For weeks, the siege continued. My boat was vandalized. Condo vehicles constantly blocked my entrance. I received bogus notices of environmental violations. Every incident was meticulously documented. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday morning. An official envelope arrived by courier. Inside were documents that looked legal, saying that my property had been formally incorporated into the association's jurisdiction. Even more alarming, my forged signature appeared on multiple pages. "Document forgery," Christopher said as he looked over the papers. "Now we have evidence of a serious crime. This changes everything." 2 days later, Rebecca Wilson was arrested as she left a beauty salon. The charges included fraud, forgery, organized crime, and attempted illegal property appropriation. Her indignant face as she was escorted away made the local papers. The subsequent investigation uncovered a much larger scheme. Rebecca had forged the signatures of 3 other property owners, annexing their lands to the condo. A kickback scheme with contractors explained her insistence on mandatory renovations. And the police buddies were actually cousins getting paid to intimidate residents. In a tense hearing, I stared right into Rebecca's eyes as the judge denied her bail, citing a danger to the community and risk of evidence tampering. "I never imagined that a simple veteran would end my career," she muttered bitterly as she passed by me, escorted. "Never underestimate a man who stared death in the face, Rebecca," I replied. The Homeowners Association tried to distance themselves from Rebecca by claiming they were unaware of her practices, but the investigation revealed widespread complicity. Substantial fines were imposed, the board resigned en masse, and a forensic audit was ordered. When I finally returned to the peace of my cabin, something had changed. It wasn't just the legal victory or the substantial financial compensation for the damages. It was the understanding that my sacred space would remain mine, not by luck, but because I chose to defend it. That night, sitting on my rebuilt deck and watching the river, I felt a presence beside me. Not a physical one, but the ghosts of lost comrades from faraway lands. I raised a cup in silent celebration. We'd fought for freedom on foreign soil. Ironically, I'd found another fight for freedom on American ground. A month after Rebecca Wilson's sentence, I got an unexpected visit. An elderly man leaning on a cane approached hesitantly. "Mr. Rodriguez? I'm Walter Jenkins, your neighbor from across the hill. I wanted to thank you personally. Rebecca had been pressuring my family for years. We never had the guts to confront her." I invited Walter to share a coffee on my renovated deck. He admired the craftsmanship, the details I'd carved into the wood, The varnish I meticulously applied every spring. I built this deck in my first year here, I explained. Every plank represents a month of service. Every pillar, a lost buddy, when they tried to destroy it. Walter nodded, understanding the unspeakable. Some places carry more than just monetary value. In the following weeks, other neighbors from the outlying properties started to show up. They brought homemade pies, borrowed tools, and shared stories of similar intimidation. Slowly, a genuine community emerged, not forced by regulations or fees, but built on mutual respect for each other's space and choices. On one especially hot afternoon, as I finished putting up a small sign at my property's entrance, "Private property, mutual respect requested," an unknown SUV parked by my gate. A well-dressed middle-aged man stepped out, looking a bit shy. "Mr. Rodriguez?" "Julian Mercer, the new president of the Reformed Association. I'm not here to impose anything, just to start a dialogue. We've learned our lesson." I carefully weighed his words, searching for any hint of insincerity, a skill I'd honed after all the conflict. "We're rolling out a completely new code," he continued. "Outlying properties like yours will remain independent, but we're offering voluntary participation in community benefits, shared security, road maintenance, access to the marina. No aesthetic demands, just practical collaboration." I offered him some cold water, which he gratefully accepted. We talked for an hour about healthy boundaries, property rights, and coexistence. I didn't sign anything that day, but I left the door open for future discussions. That night brought the first major storm of the season. Thunder rumbled through the valley as I checked the windows. The phone rang. Walter Jenkins, worried about a possible flood in the creek we shared. "I'm on it," I assured him. "If the water goes up another 6 inches, I'll trigger the alert system we installed." The informal community we'd built after the Rebecca Wilson ordeal had even set up emergency protocols. It was strange how an external threat forged connections that might never have existed otherwise. From the window, I watched lights come on along the river. Other night watchers like me, monitoring, protecting, and communicating with quick messages. Unlike the rigid, punitive system of the old association, our interactions were based on genuine need and respect. The next day, Christopher Grant called to say that the collective civil action against the association was settled. The financial compensation for everyone affected would be substantial. "What are you going to do with your share?" he asked. The answer came without hesitation. "I'm going to create a fund to help owners in similar situations. No one should have to face a system designed to crush them alone." After hanging up, I realized how the conflict had changed not only my relationship with the community, but my own identity. For years after leaving the military, I defined myself by solitude, by the distance I kept from the world. The battle with Rebecca Wilson forced me to reconnect, to form alliances, to remember that even introverts sometimes need to share the trenches. In the following weeks, I set up the Rodriguez Property Defense Fund with a sizable portion of the compensation. Christopher agreed to manage the legal aspects pro bono. Walter Jenkins, surprisingly, turned out to be an ex-accountant and offered to handle the finances. Our first case involved an elderly widow in a neighboring county, who was facing eviction by a developer who had forged documents of her late husband. The similarities to my situation didn't go unnoticed. That fall, we celebrated our first collective legal victory with a modest riverside barbecue. As I looked around at the faces, some familiar, others new, all united by our shared experience of resistance, I realized I'd found something unexpected. My property remained my sanctuary, but it was no longer an isolated fortress. It had become a beacon for others, a symbol of what one determined person can achieve against seemingly insurmountable forces. On the exact anniversary of Rebecca Wilson's arrest, I sat alone on my rebuilt deck, watching the river flow undisturbed as always. Some say water is the most adaptable element. It goes around obstacles, finds new paths, and never stops moving. Maybe I learned something from the river I watched so often. Rebecca would serve years in prison. The association now operated under court supervision and new principles. My property remained unchanged in appearance, but transformed in meaning. The cabin I built as a refuge from the world had, ironically, become my path back to humanity. Not on their terms, imposed aesthetics, forced conformity, submission to artificial hierarchies, but on my own terms. Authenticity, mutual respect, voluntary cooperation. The full moon lit up the river, creating a silver pathway across the dark water. On nights like that, back in the fields of Afghanistan, we used to say that all men, friends or foes, looked up at the same moon. Maybe Rebecca Wilson, in her cell, was also gazing at that same satellite, reflecting on the choices that led her there. I raised my cup in a silent toast to the river, to the property I defended, to battles won and lost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, other owners in need of help, more stories of resistance and grit. But for tonight, I allowed myself simply to exist in my hard-fought space. Then my phone lit up with a message from Christopher. Another case, another city, the same predatory methods. I replied affirmatively. We'd be there on Monday. I smiled, recognizing the irony. I had sought isolation and found purpose. I'd built walls and discovered doors. Some fight battle after battle without ever knowing why. I finally understood. We defend our territories, physical, emotional, and legal. Not just for the space itself, but for the right to choose our own path within it. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to leave a like, share it with anyone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more accounts of everyday battles for autonomy and dignity. Remember, your property, your rights, your story. Nobody can take that from you without your permission. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay determined. Leave a like and subscribe for more stories like this.